Welcome to today's USP and Pharmatech webinar, The Difference Between Compliance and Quality. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Next. Each registration is unique and grants the right for the individual registrant only to view this webinar. Sharing this webinar with unregistered viewers either during or after its performance violates USP's copyright and is prohibited. Next. If you have not already done so, we ask that you take some time to read the USP Education course disclaimer. You can download this presentation, including the disclaimer, from your USP Education account. Please follow the instructions in your confirmation email to download the presentation. Next. We have two presenters for today's webinar. Presenting first today is Stephanie Golding. Ms. Golding has over 25 years working with quality management systems and validation program management in the pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device, and related life science industries, and has held quality management leadership positions at MediaTek and Boehringer Ingelheim Chemicals. She is an ASQ certified quality auditor and ASQ certified pharmaceutical GMP professional. Also presenting today is Mike Porter. Mr. Porter has over 30 years working in quality and leadership roles across global companies in the pharmaceutical industry and utilizes his extensive GXP knowledge in the areas of medical devices, manufacturing, laboratory, and clinical trials. He has held leadership positions at Eli Lilly and Company, Myriad Genetics, and PPD Pharmaceutical Product Development, in addition to his consulting experience. Welcome and thank you to you both. I will now hand over the presentation to Ms. Golding.
And thank you, Christy and USP Education, for this opportunity. Mike and I are really happy to be here today, talking a little bit about the difference between compliance and quality. But before we dive into those differences and talk about moving from compliance towards quality, we want to really begin our conversation today remembering that there are patients counting on the pharmaceutical and biologics companies, the companies that we work for or work with, to provide them the medicines that they really need. Many of these medications are truly life-saving and make significant differences in the daily lives for the people who take them. So every dose that we produce, every dose that a patient takes must be safe, effective, and free from contamination and defects. Patients at their heart really want to be confident in both the quality as well as the availability of these medicines that they take. But the reality is that compliance does not create a safe and reliable supply chain. As manufacturers, focusing on compliance alone really puts us in a short-sighted mindset and often leads to quality issues, rejected batches, and potentially shorting the drug supply to our patients who are looking for those life-saving medicines.
So when we think about compliance, really to align around the terminology a bit at the start of the presentation, we're really looking at producing good quality product by meeting basic regulatory requirements, but it becomes more of a box checking exercise or a checklist mentality where we're looking to show compliance to the expectations that are in place. But as we go down that list, we might find issues, work to resolve them, and then move forward with our compliance approach. But the firms that take this approach may not be investing into quality system improvements that are going to really drive some of the error proofing that we need within the industry to have the availability of drug product and the quality of drug product that Stephanie was just talking about. So instead, there's more of a focus on audits and having successful outcomes of audits as well as regulatory inspections. And typically we might fall into a perpetual trap of resolving these issues in order to release the product. And this can get very expensive, especially when we look at potential outcomes like recalls or market withdrawals. So while compliance is deeply rooted in our industry, we really want to focus today on how we can move beyond that mindset.
And thanks, Mike, for talking us about a little bit about what compliance really looks like. And as we talked about as an industry, our goal really is to produce high quality and safe medicines and to provide them reliably to the patients who need them. And this objective really stems and can be traced all the way back into the origins of our good manufacturing practices, going all the way back to the creation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in 1938. There was a lot of focus for those of you who have done US-based GMP history in the early days of driving patient safety, making sure that drugs and medicines that people were taking were safe and effective. As we move through those GMP requirements, they continue to evolve. However, as an industry, if we really take a closer look, we find that our focus along the course of that evolution has been really in demonstrating that compliance, what Mike talked about as that check the box mentality. Are we meeting those specific requirements that are stipulated by the agencies and not necessarily looking above and beyond the base requirements? So we really kind of fell into that trap, and many companies get caught up in this, what Mike described as a cycle between finding issues, fixing issues, finding issues, and fixing issues. But in 2004, for those of you like me and Mike who've been working in the industry for a number of years, the FDA published a report on pharmaceutical GMPs for the 21st century, where they really highlighted and tried to describe and articulate a new vision for how industry and in particular, in this case, the FDA would look to evolve and how they would look to operate. And shortly after they published that paper, Janet Woodcock actually was quoted in a presentation. I think this was in late 2005, describing this vision as a maximally efficient, agile, flexible manufacturing sector that reliably produces high quality drug products without extensive regulatory oversight. And for those of us who've been in industry for a while, the concept or the notion of without extensive regulatory oversight may feel a bit, at that point in time, shocking, because we were used to a scenario where we had regular inspections. It was almost like clockwork. The agency was coming in and visiting us, whether it was the FDA or if we deal with worldwide products, your local health authorities. A lot of them were operating in the same kind of mentality, but here in the US, the Janet Woodcock, who was the commissioner at that time, just was really looking to drive a vision where the FDA didn't have to provide that extensive oversight, that constant checking and double checking of how manufacturers' quality systems were functioning, et cetera. But we all recognize that realistically, in order to achieve that kind of vision, we actually have to rise above just focusing on compliance in order to get there. We are going to have to look at how we operate and embrace quality as foundational to that day-to-day operations. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So then from there, and especially over the last 10 years, additional regulations and guidance documents have been released aiming to set the expectations that manufacturers need to have scientifically sound and risk-based approaches to quality management. This transition is not unique to the US FDA, but you can see this as evident through a lot of the similar types of guidance documents published through the International Council on Harmonization, which is a coalition of worldwide regulatory agencies that is focused on trying to harmonize requirements globally. So they are looking at aligning these visions of ensuring that quality management systems are grounded in science and include risk-based approaches, meaning that looking at a check the box, looking at a compliance mentality is really not going to serve us well in the future. This transformation in thinking is also evident in the Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act, which was signed into law in the summer of 2012. So this is the latest incarnation of drug law in the US. And among many things that were included in this law, the FDASIA further expanded the FDA's authority by including measures such as looking at and challenging risk-based inspection frequencies, and allowing the FDA to request certain records in advance of or in lieu of inspections. And many of us are painfully aware of that record request avenue that FDASIA provided us because of the pandemic. We saw over the last 2 years with a reduction because of a pandemic, an actual global pandemic with live inspections that we saw not only the FDA, but many worldwide agencies requesting documents from manufacturers as a means to conduct and oversee the manufacturing operations and make sure that things were sufficient. And this type of shift in thinking and moving even their own processes, the agency's own processes towards risk-based scheduling and evaluation points, it really has sent a signal to the industry that we really have to start thinking about how that may happen. How do we start really moving beyond just checking the box, and how do we focus on continual improvement and moving towards a larger vision of quality?
So in relation to FDASIA, giving authority to collect the pharmaceutical records and information even remotely as part of their risk-based oversight, this really laid the foundation for the FDA to begin considering a metrics program. And they've published multiple draft guidance documents in regards to this to look at how to evaluate product manufacturing quality through a metrics analysis. And the goal ultimately being to hopefully better understand the underlying causes of the drug shortage that we're experiencing. And I think in the draft guidance led to discussions with the industry. The industry really fed back several concerns in those conversations around the burden on the companies to provide this data, aligning on the key definitions that would be utilized, and also looking at how the data would ultimately be used in conjunction with inspections or in other ways. And that dialogue with the agency really led the agency to understand that the metrics alone cannot measure a company's quality culture, right? It's a piece of the discussion. Metrics are important to us to measure our quality management system and to the FDA to look at company performance, but it in and of itself cannot measure the quality culture. And so on the next slide, that it shows the evolution of the conversation from that point based upon those discussions that the FDA had with the industry. And if we look at ICH Q12, coming out in 2019. Really, this was a focus on risk-based management of post-approval changes and driving a robust change management program as part of the quality management system to support those post-launch changes in the products. And the CARES Act, as part of the pandemic, included provisions for the FDA to enhance their ability to identify, prevent, mitigate drug shortages, such as creating risk management plans for the drugs. But all of this in accumulation with the discussions around the metrics and how to measure quality culture really led this year in 2022 to the FDA white paper on the quality management maturity model, which we'll focus on in the next couple of slides.
Yeah, so as Mike alluded to, the FDA has put forward and released earlier this year a white paper on quality management maturity. And so I want to kind of start out with the realization and kind of acknowledging that quality management maturity is really not a new concept. Maturity models have been around for decades and are commonly used in other industries. So the fact that we're considering this or that we've gotten here is not necessarily super surprising. However, in that recent white paper, the FDA goes on to kind of articulate what this might mean for pharmaceutical manufacturers. And their vision of quality management maturity is one where manufacturers have achieved or attained this state where they have consistent, reliable, and robust business processes to achieve not only their business objectives, but most importantly for the agency, their quality objectives. and promote this environment and sense of continual improvement. So if we look at this in context of where we've been and kind of where we're going, what we're seeing is this evolution where the CGMPs, or current good manufacturing practices, define the basics and set those minimum standards. And if you use that compliance mentality and check the box, you certainly meet those requirements. But you're not going to be able to create an environment where you're going to have mature quality management systems and you're going to be able to drive continual improvement by yourself and on your own. And in order to really achieve, going back to Janet Woodcock's vision, in order to achieve that vision of that manufacturing sector that's flexible, is agile, et cetera, with minimum regulatory oversight, the agencies need to have confidence that we as an industry are able to, in essence, kind of self-improve, self-regulate, and raise that bar instead of having to rely on somebody pushing us to raise that bar. And so what all of this really means for us is that this means that it's a significant shift for most of us. When we look at our companies, I'd say many of us would probably go back to our organizations and say, okay, maybe we're somewhere on this journey, but not necessarily at that point where we could say that we really have this robust system. And the reason that quality management systems are important is when the FDA talks about this in their white paper, they talk about quality management being part of a larger array of quality. And with this, what they depict and our interpretation of that information is really that the whole array of quality focuses on pharmaceutical quality. It focuses on providing that patient their confidence in that next dose of medicine. So going back to where we started this conversation with this morning, is how do we make sure that the patients who are taking our medicines, that rely on us to make sure that that life-saving medicine is there and available for them when they need it? How do we make sure that that happens? Well, a couple different pieces that really come to this, and this will probably resonate with many of you who work in manufacturing facilities or maybe in testing facilities. But it starts at core with our quality management systems. That really is what drives a manufacturer, the ability to manufacture each and every batch. And in theory, it should be in a position where it gives us the confidence that we'd be able to accept and release every batch that we make. That in combination with process quality, which as manufacturers should give us confidence that every batch is the same, every product tablet or vial is the same, right? That process quality provides us that assurance, right? And gives us that confidence. And then the product quality portion of the quality array really talks about the specifics and nature to the product itself, right? That every pill, every injection is the same. It has the right strength, it has the right identity, and therefore that starts to build confidence with patients in the medicine that they're actually taking. But what we're really trying to drive for, and what we're really trying to look to do as an industry, is move beyond just the dose that the patient's taking, but into making sure that every dose that they need to take during the course of their treatment is there, available, safe, effective, and ready. And this is a little bit of a different shift. And what the agency did in their white paper is they kind of took a scenario that kind of rated and looked at an example case of a new product approval, where they can look at an application and they can say, okay, well, we think that the process science that's described in the application is sound and robust, and this gives us as an agency confidence that the manufacturer is actually going to be able to consistently make the product. They've got the right quality attributes identified to test the product, right? Because as we all know, we can't test quality into our products, but we can verify that they have been made appropriately and meet certain defined quality standards. But what the agency often struggles with, and Mike and I have seen this a lot in the work that we have done in industry and now as consultants we do, is really on the confidence in a manufacturer's ability to be able to make a batch and release every batch of products. So when you look at inspection histories and trends, you see a lot of firms struggle with actually being able to successfully navigate those waters and therefore provide the agency the confidence they're looking for that that facility can produce batches on a regular basis, meeting patient demands and needs. And so really quality management systems and maturity is not its own piece, but it's part of this larger overall array of quality that health authorities are really looking at as they are trying to assess performance of organizations, et cetera. And it really is a concept that's foundational in looking at quality management maturity. And so I want to take a moment before we talk about how do you get to a point where maybe that agency confidence moves from a low place to a high place, and talk a little bit about what a mature quality management system might actually look like. And as Mike alluded to when he talked about that evolution and journey through metrics and the conversations that the agencies and industry had as proposals were put out there, is really a recognition that in order to have strong, mature quality management systems, you have to have as an organization a strong quality culture. If your quality culture is not weak or it has some cracks in it, it's kind of like a foundation with cracks. It itself is not strong. It can leak. You can have issues. You can have reoccurring issues that may ultimately cause delays in medicines, making them to patients who need them. But once you have that strong foundation on quality culture, the kind of hallmarks and the characteristics really that we typically see in companies that have that mature quality management approach and system is really a couple different folds and flavors. And we'll start with the fact that they obsess about continual improvement. They're never considering what they do good enough. They don't want to be in a position where a health authority is coming in for an inspection, because I'll be honest, we're never going to move away from a mindset or an approach where the agencies won't come and inspect, but they don't want to be caught where they didn't see an issue and that they weren't already proactively addressing it. Ideally, many of these companies, their goal is to make it through inspections without any kind of observations or notations from health authorities. But to get there, they have to be innovative and creative. They focus on being efficient, being agile and adaptable, but also keeping in mind being profitable. And part of that profitability actually looks at leveraging quality to lower their costs, figuring out a way to make a product with the same quality they've always been making it, but maybe just not have as much investment in terms of additional controls or pieces. And that last piece, and probably one of the hardest to achieve, is really this integrated business and quality objectives. And as we talk through quality management maturity models and progressions and what that may look like, you'll see that that's kind of that top tier piece. That's that difference between a company with an almost mature system and a truly mature standard setting system. They really don't talk about the business and quality separately. They're all in the same kind of conversation. So when we look at this, when you look at progressing from that mindset of compliance all the way through to that mature quality management system, often what we see and what was alluded to in the white paper is really a quality management maturity model. And there's many models out there, like I mentioned previously, lots of industries use them. However, in the pharmaceutical industry, there isn't really one single defined one. The agency kind of alludes to kind of what those hallmarks might look like, what some of the components might be in their white paper. But there's also some indicators. If you go look at other industries, you do some benchmarking of what this might actually look like for the pharmaceutical industry as we move in this direction. And what you see is at these starting points and at these very basic levels, right, you're very focused on compliance. Either you've got bare minimum compliance and a very limited attention and focus on quality, or maybe you've got that a strong focus on compliance. I'm demonstrating I'm meeting those requirements. And you view quality really as a product attribute. You talk about it really only in terms of the product and not maybe in some of the larger context of conversations. But what we find interesting is that there are these trigger points that cause companies and organizations to move from one level of quality management maturity to another level of quality management maturity. So typically what you would see is a company that either doesn't have a robust compliance program or is kind of just entering our industry. Really, they often have this initial trigger that says, I've got to meet the compliance requirements, right? Not just what I think is the bare minimum, but I need to be able to get through inspection successfully and to be able to be part of manufacturing products. So you get that initial focus and that initial trigger. But as you start to go up a maturity model, what you see is those triggers change, right? So when you look at moving to the next level beyond just basic compliance, you see a drive in the organization, a desire in the organization to want to reduce their risk exposure. That could be maybe they're shorting the market on product, and they want to reduce that exposure or risk, or maybe they are failing a significant number of batches and they want to reduce those failure costs. So you start to see an organization evolve their quality systems to focus on solving problems, and you start to integrate in focuses on patient safety and what impacts does this have to the patient. And not that we forget about the quality attributes of a product, but the quality conversation gets bigger, it gets richer, it gets more complex. And these do continue to evolve all the way to the point where there's this difference between kind of being near the top and at the top. And really, the difference in the trigger for companies to really move from that embedded level of a model all the way up to kind of a standard setting model is really a self-driven desire to be the best, right? To define or redefine what quality means, right? They want to be out there adopting innovative technologies, solutions. They're out there finding new ways of doing things. And fundamentally, quality is not just an attribute anymore. It is a value. It is embedded in everything that the company does. So when we look at a quality management maturity model and what that might actually look like for the pharmaceutical industry, we could envision something like this, and we can kind of maybe see where we are in our own organizations on a model like this. Maybe we're not sitting at the top. I'd be willing to bet most of us aren't in that space, that we're somewhere else in the model. And what might it take to move from one place to another? And what I'm going to do is hand it over to Mike so he can talk through an example with a particular lens around auditing programs, favorite topic for the two of us, and what that might look like as a company makes progressions through quality management maturity.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. And we did feel like the auditing example is an excellent case study to further the conversation around this model progression that Stephanie just covered. And if you think about regulations and guidance, they're really written with outcomes in mind. They're not prescriptive. They don't tell us how to do it. They just tell us the expected outcome that we need to achieve. And so auditing has developed as a compliance-driven assessment in many companies through the years to be able to check the processes that we've put in place. Are they working? Do people understand them? Do people follow them? Do they drive the right outcomes that we would expect? And to do that, we invest a lot in writing our procedures and looking at roles and responsibilities and qualifying our auditors before we let them do the audits. Hopefully leveraging a risk-based audit schedule to maximize the touches that we have within the audit program. And we spend a lot of time also debating the observation level. Is it a critical or major or minor? right, in order to drive the right CAPA priorities and to ultimately have the effectiveness checks. And so there's a lot of time and energy and effort and cost associated with our auditing programs, looking to see, are we getting the right outcomes? But we know from the next slide, right, if we look at the FDA inspection findings year on year, we see that many of the findings repeat year after year after year. And they're around the fact that our procedures aren't written or aren't followed, right, which is fairly basic expectation. It's around data integrity. It's even about the oversight from our quality unit. And also it's around our training programs. In our audits, we might check to see that everybody is trained, right? But that doesn't mean that people have the competency needed to be able to demonstrate it in practice out on the floor, and in particular around sterile manufacturing. The FDA observations around how people implement their training repeat pretty commonly. So the auditing may look at training, but is it really assessing competency, right? Is it giving us the full value that we would expect? So if we're investing all of this time and energy and cost into a program, but yet we see from the FDA that there's still opportunity to further our maturity of our quality systems into the model that Stephanie has talked about, then really what we want to look at on the next slide is the opportunity to use our auditing to help us move forward, because auditing alone is not going to ensure compliance. As we know, auditing is more of a sampling approach, and in that I might identify issues, and that will drive fixes to those issues and allow me to move forward, but it is a sampling. And so auditing alone will be important to have a dependency on other elements of the quality management system, like my robust quality by design. Are my products and processes designed in a robust way to allow me to produce every batch in a releasable way, right? It relies upon my quality risk management approaches and focusing on the most important elements of that and having strong justification to support the decisions made. It relies upon an overall robust quality management system being understood and executed and effective. And it also relies upon ownership and accountability for quality being outside of just the quality department, having everybody that touches an element of the product understand the impact of their actions and their accountability towards producing the product that the patients are taking is a key piece of this as well. And if we overlay quality audits on top of a strong foundational system, really then how can we move from sampling and trying to find issues that we fix to using auditing to help us really drive global process improvement and really look at the effectiveness of the programs that I put in place to help me achieve the model maturity that Stephanie has talked about. Really, can we use it to confirm that these robust processes are in place? And really that drives us to the ultimate goal of having us always be inspection ready. And ultimately also it can help us tell the story on how we're using these programs and this investment of cost to help us avoid even more significant costs when we're rectifying issues that might arise. So this is one example of using our existing processes and tools to help us move along the model that Stephanie has talked about. But we can also apply this thinking to our other elements of our quality system and look at how we can mature them to help further the model maturity that we would like to achieve.
Yeah. And as Mike has talked about, right? So, you're looking through this auditing lens, right, at a quality management system. You can have processes, you can have these procedures in place, you can have all the right things that demonstrate that you comply with that expected outcome. But again, are you actually driving and using the process to drive the continual improvement? And fundamentally, as we've talked about, one of these foundations for a really mature quality management system and kind of be at the top of that model really is a strong culture. You're not going to get from just checking the box to the top of the pyramid, so to speak, without having that strong culture. So we want to spend a minute talking a little bit about what it takes to build a strong quality culture and where it starts and kind of how it evolves and where it goes. And in organizations, it doesn't matter how small or how big you are, the quality culture really begins with the leadership. And if you're small and new, it often is starting with your founding leaders, their beliefs and values. If you're a company that's been around 150 years, maybe those founding leaders are in the distant past, but a lot of those beliefs and values are certainly there, and leaders continue to model the behaviors. But what does happen is over time, through shared experiences, through bringing in new leaders, and through external influences, that culture continues to evolve. So you kind of get this cycle of evolution that takes place within an organization as you go through good and bad experiences that can shape and reinforce positive attributes, or can also equally shape and reinforce negative attributes or things that maybe aren't so desirable in a quality culture. And of course, there's opportunities to reshape a culture every time new leaders come into an organization, especially if they're at a senior level, right? They have different experiences. Sometimes there's a fresh eyes on things. And their external influences. I've been talking about quality culture for years, and I never, when I talked about quality culture, thought about integrating in conversations of what a pandemic might do to a culture, an organization's quality culture, and how that might affect how we operate and how we accomplish our business and how we meet the needs of our patients. But lo and behold, we've spent the last 2 years adapting our companies, our operations to operate in those new norms. So there are always external influences that do come in, and that varies based on where you are geographically around the world, what kind of markets you're working in, and just all kinds of different factors. So again, building a strong culture is not like this one-time activity. Part of what I really hope you take away from today is that it starts at the very beginning, but it is this constant evolution and something that needs to be tended to as an organization grows, as they develop. And certainly if your desire is to move along a spectrum of maturity, you're going to have to invest in this as a routine part of the business. Now, of course, oftentimes folks say, well, what does a strong quality culture look like? What does a good quality culture look like? And so Mike and I put together some of our typical quality culture descriptors that fall into describing quality cultures that are maybe on the weaker side of things and ones that are really strong. And I'm not going to sit here and read all of these out, but what you can see as you look at these is there's this theme through maybe a weak quality culture where there's a very reactive mode, where there's not necessarily a lot of science or logic. Quality is often in the job of the quality department. It's viewed as a product attribute, and maybe we can justify something away. But when you get into those more mature quality cultures, those really strong quality cultures, there's this collaborative space where everybody's sharing responsibility and everybody is science and data driven, root cause focused, and really the aim is to be getting better, right? If something happened and something went wrong, they look at it as an opportunity to figure out how to not ever have that happen again and prevent that going forward, right? There has to be a reason it happened, and there has to be a problem and a way that we can avoid that from happening in the future. And I think if you look at those two types of organizations, when you take that really beyond that to a group that's going to do standard setting level of quality maturity, it's not even just about preventing it from happening again, but, oh, hey, there's a new way of doing things. Is this something that we could even integrate? So while we don't ever have this problem, we could prevent this from ever happening, right? We don't even have to have a problem happen, but we're going to put in an additional improvement that we think is going to be beneficial to not only us, but to the products that we make and ultimately the patients that take those products. And I think that that's that spectrum that you're moving away from in terms of, I need to meet those requirements. I need to fix the issues. I just need to get things done, to really taking the time, effort, and energy, staying on top of what's evolving out there and integrating that into the business, really kind of driving a new way of doing things. And that's a pretty substantial journey for most companies to go down. And, we didn't want to just provide you with, okay, well, this is what the two ends of the spectrums can look like, but how can you, within your organizations, because culture is so important to building robust and mature quality management systems, how can you get there, right? And so we put together a kind of what I call a roadmap, right? And consists of three basic phases. And really what you want to do if you're going to look at proactively and systematically driving cultural change through an organization is first and foremost create this, what I refer to as a climate, right, within the organization for change. You got to have a desire. And I'm going to say this now, and I think Mike will come back to this as we conclude today. Fundamentally, if we're going to try and create the climate or the environment where we can achieve this cultural change, we have to not only understand what's best for the organization, what we're trying to achieve for our customers at the end, but we also need to focus on the individuals, because as companies, we are made up of a bunch of individuals executing jobs and roles that interact. And in order to do that, we have to go through this journey where we understand what it is we want to change, why do we want to change, and what should that look like when we get there, right? Well, how will we know that we've reached the end? And then you move into this next phase where you start to engage and enable the whole organization. And this is represented very simply, but this is really where I would say the bulk of the effort really kind of comes in, is communicating the vision. And I'm a fan of saying communicate, and then communicate some more. If you're doing cultural change, if you recognize you're not where you need to be or want to be, right, then you're going to have to over communicate. It's going to have to be constantly messaged. And we've all been a part of organizations where sometimes there's that cheesy message that's out there. But the reality is, if it's out there and it's ever present, it does seep in over time. You also want to empower action in the employee base, right? Encourage and reward the behaviors that you're looking to see, right? That those should become the new norm for the culture. Model the behaviors yourself. If you're in a leadership role, model those behaviors, act on them. If somebody's giving you some feedback, then take that and process that and react to that. And I'm also a big fan of trying to get quick wins wherever you can, celebrate small successes along the way. It keeps the organization energized as you're going through this kind of journey, because things like culture change are not fast. They tend to take time. And then you move into this implementing and sustaining phase, where you are constantly in a mode of reinforcing, and almost at some point you start to hit that mode where you flip the switch and you're in this, well, we're not only going to continually improve the business, the operations, but we're also going to be evaluating who we are, how we operate, and the general organizational culture, and is it what we want, right? And it's that constant check and balance that you build as a part of that latter stage. Um, so I'll have Mike talk through some ways that you can engage and start to actually change that culture, some things that you can actually do to implement those cultural attributes that you want to see happen.
And we have listed out a number of example supporting measures here on the slide. I'm really going to focus on two in this conversation. And the first one being the frontline leaders. If we're going to move up this maturity model, it's important to have senior leadership on board, but it's also important to leverage those frontline leaders, because they're going to hear the goals and objectives from your senior management, but they're going to be communicating that to the folks involved in touching the product on a daily basis. And they're also going to be the ones that are going to hear from the folks touching the product what barriers or issues or problems stand in their way to move forward on this maturity model, and having them understand the importance of communicating that and working through that to drive effective progress around maturing the quality management system. They play a key role in that aspect of it, and are an area that we really need to focus on as we think about this quality culture that Stephanie talked about. The other item I wanted to talk about was our metrics, right? And how we use metrics today. Many times in our quarterly metrics review with management, we're looking at metrics based on a quality management system process. So I'll look at my deviations and I'll look at how many new ones and how many closed and how late they are and what my overall performance is. And then I'll switch and I'll do the same for change control. And then I'll switch and I'll do the same for audits. But really, as we look to the future and we drive more towards electronic quality management systems and automated solutions to support our quality management system, thinking about how we want to use that data up front before we implement is important, because I can look at the data holistically and maybe get a different view on where my areas of concern and focus might need to be. So for instance, if I looked at in a clinical example, maybe informed consent, or in a manufacturing example, maybe label accountability, right? How many times does that come up in my quality system as a whole, whether it's a deviation or a change control or an audit finding? It really doesn't matter. All of those are driving actions around that particular process and are indicative of where my focus might need to be, based upon having that view looking across all of my data, as opposed to looking simply within a particular quality management system. So how do we evolve our thinking, right, with these kinds of elements to really drive us to leverage what we have, but also improve it and change it to help us walk along that model progression that Stephanie has talked about. And if we look at the next slide, the desired outcomes really from these activities are really to drive this culture of quality, but be able to speak of it in a way that the improvements, the investment that we're putting in are going to drive cost avoidance, right? To think about it a bit from the business perspective and be able to speak to it in that light, in order to gain support and momentum on this. Because if we invest up front, then we should save even more money down the road because of the corrections and the lack of issues that might arise based upon the improvements that I'm making. Right. And we really want to move towards providing confirmation as opposed to sampling and finding issues. We really want to look at our data holistically to inform us differently and help us prioritize and take that risk approach to our quality management system. And really, quality needs to have a seat at the table as we're talking about strategy and then we're talking about planning and we're talking about implementation, being upfront in those conversations with the business to align around the risk-based approach to those discussions, and also to support the activities as they move along, rather than just come in at the end and audit it and identify potential issues, is a key piece to success in this as well. And really making sure that our organizational leaders at all levels are invested in driving this quality culture, and that it's not just on quality to push and be the forefront of these conversations. So as quality professionals, it's a bit of a complicated role, because you are having to think about the business and the impact of the business and look at cost. You're having to think about compliance and making sure that we are ready for the inspections and looking at process improvements that will ensure that we have greater success with that. It's also investing in the culture, as Stephanie has talked about. And if we go to the next slide, I like the quote that we've placed here, because it's also incumbent on the quality professionals to think about organizational change management as a part of this. I can build the best process ever. I can automate that process in an efficient way. I can invest the energy and effort into rolling that process out. But I can only go as far with that as an organization, uh, as the collective individuals change to accept those changes that I'm looking at, right? So having the organization understand and be a part of and be committed to those changes is a key piece. And so that organizational change management and partnering with those in your organization that can support that is also a key element of success in this factor. And at the end of the day, collectively, this is intended, as we started, to drive us to being able to release every batch with the highest quality, so that patients have confidence in the drug, but also it's there for them when they're ready to take it and they're not having to experience any kind of shortages. So with that discussion in hand, really, I'll turn it back over to Stephanie to lead us into the Q&A part of the program.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike. And again, we thank you for your attention. And we tried to leave as much time as possible today for some Q&A. And I think as Christy indicated, as many of you have already done, as we can see, if you've got questions, please do enter them into the Conferences.io app that's included in the WebEx platform. And if for some reason we can't get to them, we've got about 10 minutes, so we're going to work through as many of them as we can. Christy and the USP education team will provide us with the questions, and we'll do some follow-up with everybody so that we do get answers to the questions that you guys have. So we'll start with the one that's at the top because you guys voted for it a lot. The question is, do you need to be a big company, aka a GSK, a Sanofi, et cetera, to have mature quality management? That answer is no. Absolutely not. It's really irrelevant of company size. It's really more about how the company is actually operating, right? Every company can have mature quality management systems and can progress along that quality management maturity model. It doesn't take a big company alone to do it. You can do it as a much smaller organization.
Yeah,
Mike, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would agree completely with that. I think you and I have both worked with all sizes of companies through the years, and it is much more about the focus, the commitment, the mindset than it is about the size. And so, absolutely, don't feel like you're constrained based upon the size of your company to think about these concepts and implement.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, the next question, thank you for the nice comments. We appreciate that. And certainly we do hope everybody takes a moment to fill in their evaluations as well. But this person asked about the fact that now that this quality management maturity white paper is published by the FDA, you know, how can it be implemented? And so much like with the quality metrics dialogue that happened several years ago, there's an ongoing dialogue between the agency and industry about what might that look like. There have been some pilots that the agency has done, so they kind of have their version of a quality maturity model that they've been working to develop. What I understand, having attended a stakeholder meeting back in May about the white paper, which if you haven't watched and you want some more great information, I encourage you to go to the FDA's website and look for the quality management maturity workshop. They recorded the sessions and they are made publicly available. But what they've basically done is done some pilots with working with some third-party assessors to look at quality management maturity, and they've defined a number of attributes to be evaluated, questions, and you see some companies reporting on what that experience was like, et cetera. So I don't know the exact answer yet because I, like everybody, am figuring out and learning from the agency as they're reporting on some of the pilots, how they're actually doing this. But clearly, they've begun to formulate what that model looks like. There is a strong emphasis from what I can see on leadership and culture in the quality management maturity model. So it's not just about systems and processes. They're looking to understand how the organization functions and really where is the focus. I would encourage, as a great resource, is to spend some time watching some of those industry presentations, because they had some of the companies who were participating in the pilot programs present their experiences with it. And I think you'll get a good insight as to kind of some of the hallmarks that they're starting to consider. It is a work in progress. It's not finished. It's certainly not something that, you know, today we can say, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll be there. The other piece of the equation is every company is a little bit different. And so when you look at your own organization, you're going to have to take a look at if these are the hallmarks that the agencies are really starting to look for as a quality management maturity at that top level. How do we get ourselves from here to there, right? What does our journey need to look like to navigate those waters? Because as the previous question answered, while you don't have to be a big company. The journey for a big company is going to look different than a journey for a small company. They're not necessarily going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Mike, any additional thoughts?
No, but I think along those lines, the last question on there is, does it depend on where the company is with phase 1 or 2? I also, I think we could throw that into that same conversation there, because really it doesn't matter. And in fact, you're almost at an advantage to be starting early with phase 1 programs, because you can start to build that culture and mindset early, right? We talked about having robust scientific processes for our product design and process design, and really instilling this kind of concept even ahead of phase 1 in our product development, so that we have the right maturity as we move through that progression. There is advantage to looking at it at that point in the process.
Awesome. Great question. So next question at the top of the list. What are the key drivers and enablers for QMM progression? Mike, maybe I'll let you take an answer at this one, and then I can
Yeah,
add to.
absolutely. And I think it starts with really understanding your culture today and where you are on that progression, and being able to effectively communicate that to the organization, along with the benefits of starting to drive this progression forward, right? And gaining that alignment and commitment from management, based upon where you are today, and laying that foundation, laying that model. You can't tackle it all at once. So where are we going to start? What are the priorities? What are our key risks? Really defining those elements of the discussion, and having that in an open conversation with senior leadership, and then looking at how to start to communicate this throughout the organization, so that there's an understanding and awareness of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think that we've talked about the strong quality culture. I would add a enabler is an aware senior leadership team. Um, you know, if leadership at its core really isn't aware and has that accurate self-perception of where a company is, and they themselves don't recognize the need to progress and to evolve, um, it's really hard. It's kind of like the old adage of pushing a rock up a hill, right? It's really hard to do. So for me, fundamental for anything, I actually always start kind of with a piece of leadership recognition, leadership self-awareness, organizational self-awareness. That without that, you're not going to move beyond those more basic levels that kind of focused on compliance. Maybe I move into looking at root causes and trying to reduce cost and things like that. But to progress beyond that, one of those really key pieces really centers around a strong leadership team and a strong sense of self-awareness, and a willingness to, in some ways, be vulnerable to kind of the truth, right? As to where you are, and maybe you aren't where you want to be. And I think companies that can see that and are willing to process that and accept that are the ones that are able to move along. And if I go back, I love the first question, if it's not obvious, that question of, is it just for big companies? It's not. Some of the companies that I've seen that are very mature in their approach to quality and live and breathe quality as part of the way they operate, and it's embedded in their business, are small companies. And it's rooted in their leadership. It's rooted in who the company is and what they've driven. And I think that is the fundamental key and driver. And I think there was a question that's in here that kind of talks about advising leadership to understand the importance of quality culture. I think it's the third one down, third one up. That's a tough one. If the leadership isn't seeing what you're seeing and you're embedded in the organization, right, to get to this driver and enabler, you have to get to a point where leadership understands this, because otherwise you are going to be pushing rocks up hills, and they're just gonna roll back on you. I've been in companies where that's happened, and it feels really bad think you're making progress, and then to have everything unravel on you just because leadership kind of comes in and makes waves, and says something that really derails what you were trying to do. So I think that that's the foundational one. And then I think, again, you can look at other drivers. I think the higher up you get, the more you start to look at technology and start to take advantage of things like EQMSs and business process and analytics and things like that. But fundamentally, culture and leadership, I think, are the two pieces that I would say are absolutely essential in order to move up that maturity model.